what is still essentially occupied territories. A clashing of very different economies, very different measures, if you will, of happiness and wealth, and for our international guests here and those watching online, here in United States and in Canada, we have an apartheid system, the Indian reservation system, which is, of course, surrounded by settler communities, and so a lot of the extractive industries that are going on in our homelands, or destructive, toxic industries like power plants that surround our territories, polluting our air and water, tend to be owned or based in communities that are adjacent to our tribal territories. And so it's the whole context of environmental racism in America. And so, or one track in the story of environmental racism in America. So, rights of Mother Earth, and this whole movement could be something that would help provide some balance, I guess, in terms of, those that are currently participating in a very exploitive and oppressive economic system and profiting from it. And, rights of Mother Earth could be something that, could empower constituencies that are currently, being disproportionately affected by these types of things, by giving voice to, the ecosystem within the context of jurisprudence. I don't know if that helps.
Wow. Not going to give him the microphone again. Just kidding. Okay, so page 3 that we have, I'll try and hurry, is the worldwide political movement, and how do we feed into this critical mass of Indigenous cosmos, worldview, ideas of rights of Mother Earth. Again, is another question. How do we change the 99% and the 1%? Rome could be used to stop harmful transport or development in tribal ecosystems. And so again, that one we were talking about how on our tribal land there's a lot of environmental waste and a lot of radioactive material, harmful, hazardous material that gets trucked through our reservation or stored on our reservation without really our input. And to gain those rights, to gain the rights of Mother Earth, to help our people live happily in those areas, healthy, is what we got from that point. Page 4. No. Just kidding.
I just wanted to interject in there too. There was also like a lot of devil's advocacy brought up in the conversation about how rights of Mother Earth could be utilized as as a measure that could, both empower treaty rights and empower, other kind of legal mechanisms that we use to defend our fundamental human rights in our land base and our sovereignty, things like the National Historical Preservation Act and, NEPA, a whole bunch of these different things. But also, rights of Mother Earth could be, manipulated potentially against us. So it begs an answer to the question, well, who's enforcing this? And what are the lines drawn? This morning there was a presentation on existing, Native American legal landscape. And, part of that was outlining what are the direct intervention mechanisms, whether negative or positive, that the U.S. government has to intervene on tribal sovereignty, including, I guess most specifically, congressional plenary power. And so questions like that are really important. Well, rights of Mother Earth, and empowering the rights of a river, or of, say, San Francisco Sacred Peak, or, the Sacred Black Hills, all of these different things that, are so very dear and sacred to us, could be interpreted in a very different way by, say, like, I don't know, Paul Watson of, like, Sea Shepherd, who was, like, hella racist to whale hunters, for example. Anyway, that's a long story that I won't get into. But yeah, that's the point. There's a flip side to every story.
Okay. So we came up with this expression, to sum it all up, was when in Rome. So it's kind of funny. So Rome was our acronym that we came up with, Rights of Mother Earth. And that's when the wheels started really turning at the end, when we're saying that that in building alliances with other non-Indigenous peoples and entities and organizations and just communities in general, people, just really connecting human to human, and trying to change the non-Indigenous mindset that a lot of people have and assimilate them into Native culture. And so that's what we were kind of thinking, is how are we going to actually make these people understand what it means to give rights to the planet Earth, or to Mother Earth, or to nature. And one last thing, we asked a question that was, how do we make sure non-Native communities use this to regulate on Native practices? One of them, again, was what Clayton was talking about with the seal hunting. So thank you for your...
Thank you. And so, Candy, are you coming up, or is group number 2 coming up? All right. So thank you, everybody. Group number 2.
Let's hear a big round of applause for group number 1.
Group number 4 is going to go real quick, if you don't mind, please. I just have to go, so.
We have a computer because we're like technological like that. So Paulette's just going to go over the notes that we took, but I just want to say that we had a really good group. There was a lot of discussion. It got kind of deep, and it was a little tense a couple of times where people, and that's fine, that's good. There was a lot of discussion about partnerships and what that means exactly. And there was a lot of disagreement about what that means as well. So go ahead, Paulette.
I'll just kind of go through the bullet points as we put them, and I'll forward these on to the group. I came in a little late, so I came in on a conversation, and part of the problem is consciousness, the Native consciousness versus the Western ideologies and their consciousness. There are many non-Natives that are wanting to contribute, but they don't hold that consciousness of that connectedness to the earth and to our environment and to our space. Hope is that the non-Natives will have a change of paradigm, or that Western dominant society will have a shift. Partnerships on a non-Native agenda, and the non-Natives will still, the non-Natives will still attempt to take control, but we still have to partner with them. How can we partner with the majority society and still maintain control? Well, that's one of the things we're going to have to work together on, because we can't do this individually, and we can't do this separated into different groups. We have to do this as one race, the human race. There are also many other concerns other than just the environment. There's the other relations in that environment. Sometimes we need to look at the bigger picture. Often science has compartmentalized and individualized the different areas that they're specializing in, and often covet that information as theirs. And we need to remember that it's each of those pieces that go into the larger picture that make the whole picture. So we need to try to bring back together all those sciences that have specialized in their specific niche, and remind them that we need to collaborate. Relationships are needed to be understood between people and within the many levels of our social structures. So we have to not only learn to work together, but we have to create relationships, and relationships require respect and understanding and patience and time. There are different ways of thinking, and we need to acknowledge those ways and try to find the commons instead of the differences. Water is a connecting factor. Water came up frequently. The water sacredness of ceremonies. Water is considered a commodity by the courts. Water is a connecting mechanism between all things, and water is, again, sacred. We talked about how there's major corporations going around the world and buying up the water rights from the indigenous people, and how, as indigenous people, we have a right to those waters, among other things in our environment, such as the air and the soils. Legally, these corporations must engage in conversation with the stakeholders, the tribes, the communities. And then we talked about who's going to be there to be the checks and balances to be sure that they were appropriately conferred with all that utilize that water. And then we brought up the other relations that are dependent upon that water that don't have that voice, and who's going to stand up for those. There must be advocates for those that can't speak for themselves. How can we break the paternalistic worldviews was the next part of the conversation we shifted into. There was discussion between the differences within our own tribes of paternal, maternal worldviews and perceptions. And so I don't necessarily think it's just a paternal worldview. I think it's, that plenary power worldview. One of the problems that as indigenous people we had in the beginning was the comprehension of ownership. Now that we understand it, how do we change what's been done? There is no price in our land, and then we had a conversation how indigenous people of other areas, if they were the owners of their natural resources according to the government, how could they protect it, and would they? And they, like to think that they do, or have, or would. Then we talked about how some tribes, we all ourselves are hypocrites to an extent. We've contributed to the commodification of the Mother Earth, and we have to, acknowledge that and change our own ways of being, not just the way we think, but the way we act, the way we live, our own environment, make changes in our own homes, in our own ways. Many of us have disassociated from our environment. We live in our climate-controlled houses, drive climate-controlled cars, and we often don't exist in the environment that we are impacting or impacted by. We talked about declaring our own policies and laws in relation to Mother Earth and our environment. We talked about having better relationships and co-management with cities, state, counties, and federal governments in relation to Mother Earth and our environment. And we talked about how greed separates communities. And we're all human beings in spite of our faults. We're all in a constant state of learning. We need to remember to let people know that we hear their issues and their pains, and that ours have been heard, and that we are responding to a greater call, that our Mother is calling and out in pain. And the message to the entire room or to the entire world are that we are united and speak as one, that many nations are united in this process, and that it's okay to disagree, but not to be disagreeable. Look to all of our allies and teach and train them. There are many in federal institutions that want to help but don't know how. We have opportunities to help. There are groups that admit they've not worked in the manner that is inclusive to these indigenous communities, but now are willing to do so. They are interested in making these relationships, they are working together, forging relationships with the stakeholders and community with respects to all of our relationships. And these agencies are interested in engaging with Native communities. We as Native communities must not forget the pain, but learn from it and let go of it as not to be crippled by it. Another thing that was brought up was that all people are indigenous to somewhere. Help them connect to what makes them who they are and be proud of that and find a stake in that. We talked about how Western ideology has cannibalized itself, and if it hasn't, it's well on its way. Expand past temporal thought. Climate change adaptation by indigenous people is what we do. We persist, we maintain hope. We talked about how we are all in a space here, and we all will return to the mother, that man has created this problem, that man has changed how we exist with nature. We receive knowledge from our environment. We receive help from our environment, from the animals, the plants, the stars, the wind, the water. This is an interdynamic relationship. There is this spiritual way to live within the world. There are times when you can there are certain times when you should cut a tree or ask the permission of a lagoon to hunt. These are things that I remember as a child being told and often get forgotten. The space that we live in, we have to learn to live better in that space and be better to the environment. The rights of Mother Earth have existed forever. They've existed before we do. We're now talking about rights that have always existed. Companies are dividing indigenous people. Early on, it was the church that divided the people. Now it's companies, corporations, oil. In remote communities, these ideas are being sold. This affects the spiritual rights of people and the rights of Mother Earth. Sorry, we had a lot of conversation. Yeah. We talked about a concentric interrelatedness, which I thought was a good point. But we've got probably a minute left. I'll let you go ahead and wrap this up if you have anything more you want to add.
Just that what our brother meant by kincentric is that that it's a term that they're using in science now that we all know as all my relations. Like, because we're all kin. And so that's what it means, and they're using it in academia. I think it's hilarious. But basically it means, Nikanagana, all my relations, Mitakayasi, all those things. So they're now using that to describe. Okay. Right.
We just thought it was cool. We're cool.
Yeah, we're done.
We're done.
Big Rach.
Niawa, thank you.
And we have group 2. Alana, are you group 2? 3? Okay. Sure, you're coming already, so you might as well come on down. Group number 3 is on their way to the podium. I'm sorry, Simone.
All right. My name is Randy Kapashisit, by the way. I'm from Northern Ontario, Canada, member of the Cree Nation. First of all, I want to thank all the participants in our group for sharing as they did, and for our facilitator and recorder. Thank you for a job well done. I have the easy part, reading. Maybe over here a little bit more. Yeah, good. All right, yeah, I can see it better there. We'll do this as quickly as possible. We did have, obviously, a lengthy discussion as well, and there's a number of notes that will speak to that, but we'll give you the Reader's Digest version. one of the first comments that was made was that this whole topic of assigning rights to nature or the rights of Mother Earth, we need to be clear that where we're coming from is the Indigenous view of rights and responsibilities, as opposed to the Western notion of rights. I think that there was consensus on that point very clearly in our group, and so that's our first point to share with the group. The rights of Mother Earth are fundamental to Indigenous peoples, and that this is representing really nothing new, which is a view that we've heard from other groups as well. But it's critically important to remember that. We're not talking about something that is foreign to us. As Indigenous peoples, this is part of our inherited responsibility and tradition. We also recognized and spoke of the common connection in the context of, as Indigenous people, our ancestors come back in another life form, and that, when we acknowledge and recognize our relatives, it's a direct connection to our ancestors that have passed on. So it's not as though that, we are acting alone. We are acting with the full knowledge that we are connected to all living things, and that our relatives and ancestors make up this natural world, even though they may be gone in the body form that we knew them in. The other thing was, there's also this idea that, human beings exist as a part of nature or separate from nature. And Indigenous people clearly come from the point of view that we are a part of nature. And this notion of rights and assigning rights often comes from the arrogance of the human being, which basically places themselves outside of the natural world. So I think that's an important point to recognize as well, that we don't see this in that light. The other thing that was said was that there's no time for business as usual in terms of how we understand that and how we often get caught up in that world, and that we really need to do some new thinking regarding the idea of the rights of nature, or the rights of Mother Earth, and that this new set of eyes that we need to bring forward will hopefully bring this dialogue to another level that needs to happen from an Indigenous perspective. This idea as well of the principle of cultural diversity or biological diversity, in part I think what we're struggling against here is that this notion of assigning rights to nature or Mother Earth, we've been saying that as peoples for a long time. That's just never been valued or recognized by the world community. And so when nation states talk about cultural or biological diversity, let's remember that as Indigenous peoples, that discussion and dialogue requires a space at that table as equals. And that story is a long story. It predates any story, in fact, in terms of North American discussion on cultural or biological diversity. We also have this clear obligation to creation as Indigenous people. It supersedes anything else in relation to fulfilling our values or understanding the world and moving forward in it. And so let's always keep that at the forefront of our discussion and thought on this topic. The other side of this is that some of us actually have been practicing this and putting into play this idea that nature has rights, and ultimately as Indigenous people we have to respect and respond and fulfill our obligations in that way. We've been building economies, for example, that are based upon those principles already in some parts of Indigenous North America for sure, and perhaps elsewhere in the world. So let's keep that in mind, that this is stuff that we've already put into practice in many places. There's also this, I guess, these principles that we talked about, that we can do things in a different way going forward, whether it's, the example of housing was talked about from two different perspectives, at least from the participants in our group. And then also this notion of Indigenous ecotourism. That there are ways to actually represent clearly the values that come from this place that is being referred to as the rights of nature or the rights of Mother Earth. And if we understand that in our own cultural traditions and in our own areas, we can actually see that we're able to move forward doing that now without necessarily waiting for the rest of the world to catch on. And so those were some of the examples that we talked about. There were other things perhaps that were said, but this is our attempt to try and capture and summarize the key points. If I've missed something, just let me know. Okay. All right, thank you.
Now we're bringing up our lovely facilitator, Simone, and hopefully, you're on your way up too. Excellent. This is group number 2. Is that right? Okay, not that that matters. They got to sit in the awesome Haskell Cultural Center, so they might have been even more inspired being able to break out there. So, here they come. Introduce yourself.
We're back there strategizing who's going to say what. We're group number 2. Is there anybody else from our group who would like to come up and help us present? We had such good people. All right, then we'll do our best to represent the conversation. Oh, I know, it's okay. So my name is Simone Senegals.
Hi, my name is Marshall.
My name is Denny.
And I just really want to say again to thank you for our group. They really brought it. We had great conversation. People really brought a lot of their collective wisdom and knowledge, and they were really good sharers. So I'll start off real quick, and then I'll pass it off. We spent a lot of time having dialogue about sort of traditional knowledge and wisdom and ways of thinking about Mother Earth. And we too talked about water. We talked about privatization of water, ownership of water, and we kind of really talked about the ways that things are playing out in our communities, either with this sort of the way that we are here, kind of colonized, or where Mother Earth is, or nature is natural resources and its property, and then we kind of talked about. We really talked a lot about those two different ways of thinking and the rights of Mother Earth and how that would kind of look in our communities, and in fact, how that has looked in our communities forever. So I'm going to turn it over to my folks.
Hi. We started off about, I guess, based on a question. The question was on ownership of water. Apparently in California, it is outlawed to collect water. I guess I'm thinking water catchment systems and stuff like that. And being that California is a PL 280 state, I'm assuming that state mandated is affecting the tribes there. So being that Arizona and New Mexico don't have the PL 250, 280 status, I'm assuming that they can create their own laws. And then we decided to question the reasoning on that, and there was a discussion on replenishment of aquifer does in fact affect the tribes, and how does it affect the water rights. That seems to be a very popular topic. And we looked at the whole Hopi-Navajo structure and how mass development has changed our ideals and cultures and led us to be more, I guess, corporate-minded, as opposed to relaying these technical terminology towards cultural and the value system there is often ignored. And another thing that we talked about is, the reasoning behind it. We talked about leasing percentage of the water rights and the water banking system. And my side points were like, there is corporate interest in our resources, which is widely known among indigenous people. So electricity and H2O is a huge commodity for major corporations that have stakes in, how to hold that wealth to themselves. And I know for a fact that Arizona Arizona State does not support non-renewable resources. And I believe Janet Brewer signed that into law. And other things that we were looking at in reference to that is the cultural aspect or cultural effects of it, which is using water or collecting water is a part of our cultural practices, which goes back to planting and using the rain to use, like the way my grandma used to catch the rain and use it for anything in the house. If drinking, it was like fresh drinking water. So that cultural value and how we practice those cultural sustainable ways are not considered in these laws that are made because we're not able to stand as a in solidarity. So after we started talking, then we switched over to adopting. What will happen to this after adopting Mother Earth? And one person said that people might have to live closer together because of the whole water issue, closer to the water, that is. And the topic of natural disasters, given that the drought and certain things that will occur to counter too much use of resources. And then at the same time, another person brought up traditional ecological knowledge, which is basically what we talk about and how to respect Mother Earth and how to define it and how we perceive our connectedness to it. And it's not acknowledged by non-indigenous peoples or people that's not indigenous-minded. And we went on to talk about how those traditional knowledge has led us to do certain things and maintain our culture. And then we went to discussions of how our traditional values and where our value systems lie. And we asked the question of the difference between the rights of nature or the rights of Mother Earth, the technicalities of language and practices from two different views. And we made a point that nature is more like outside. We're like, somebody said earlier that we're, from a distant from nature, and it's almost like it's just something alien from us that we can go to enjoy, but we're constantly in it, and there's no relations. But for Mother Earth, it's an indigenous context where it's intimate, and there's the status of relations to everything that surrounds us in the universe. So we went on to talk about the elements of Earth and how it will correct itself eventually, and anthropocentric views and utilitarian uses of indigenous people contemporarily, and Winter's doctrine, and healing the generations, traditional. What does traditional mean to us today, and how it's interpreted by a lot of different people, but some people are.
Okay, one of the things that the last group before us, they put it well about our arrogance towards, controlling nature. Anyway, I just want to give one point, and this point is that we've been shown by the power of Mother Earth, we call nature, and letting us know. We always say they because they are our ancestors when it comes to the winds, the rains, and so they show us that and tell us. But the mainstream media puts images all out to the public, nationally, internationally, but it is looked at differently. But for me, when I see them, thinking, okay, look at this. What is this? What is it saying? I'm talking about the Joplin, Missouri tornado that happened not long ago when Walmart was totally destroyed, the whole area for miles. But it left one shelf of toilet paper. So what did that say? What were they saying to us? So, it reminds us. But we need to take these concepts to another level and take their images and reinterpret and message something for Mother Earth.
Well, I think that says it all, but people are proud of me to say something. So, Indian tribes, they don't live by these things. Everybody likes to talk about tribal knowledge, TEK, whatever. Indian tribal governments don't operate by them, and it's sometimes it can be difficult to find people living by them. And so when you look at the first group who spoke, someone talked about we need to raise our consciousness, like everybody, and that's meaning that if we have every Indian represented by my 10 fingers, you have some people who some believe need to have their consciousness raised because people don't have a shared experience. We don't go out and experience the earth. We have a different life than our guests here. And we don't like to admit it. Consequently, you can look at examples of tribal governments today. So, if we had a corporation that was willing to buy some carbon credits from Indian tribes, if we want to oversimplify it, perhaps you have this mother, this relation, or you have this resource, the earth. What is that Indian tribe going to do? On one hand, you have some small percentage of the population who are saying, that's our mother, you can't be doing that, you can't be selling her. And then you have another group and, well, we need some money. What is that Indian tribe going to do? And you can look at that. That's not a speculative question. You can look at that. You can look at, and carbon credits it's just the latest in a long string. You can look at water, you can look at air, you can look at different mineral resources. Every single time you can see what's happening. If you don't want to believe those type of examples, then you can look at other people who live in third world conditions outside of the United States. You can look at them right now, or you can look at them historically. The situation is always the same, but because of the way that we live, there's hard decisions that are to be made, and people don't want to make them. That's kind of a lot of what we were talking about boiled down to. So that's it.